The WIAC, or the WIAC, however you pronounce it, it's home to D3 sports juggernauts like UW La Crosse, UW Oshkosh, and UW Whitewater. The 8 teams have a combined 132 championships in Division III and 193 overall across multiple divisions from the past. Some call it the SEC of Division III. With such a deep history, there are some corners where history has settled. Today we're shaking off the dust to reveal deeper history on a team often overlooked, the University of Wisconsin-Superior Yellow Jackets. If you went up to anyone in Wisconsin on the street today or asked any Division III historian what they knew about the UW Superior football program, you'd be hard-pressed to get anything out of them. Beginning play in 1909 in the Wisconsin State Teachers College Conference, the Yellow Jackets would see the early successes of a program that seemed destined for football glory. But during the Yellow Jackets' 83 years of existence, we would see a program fall from grace, be stricken with systemic issues, playing some unbelievable games and situations, and this was all before their abrupt end in 1992. This is an exploration of a program that once succeeded early, yet couldn't sustain its momentum. What eventually led to an agonizing end to their gridiron days would be much more nuanced. Superior first started playing in 1909, but records of each game were hard to find up until 1911. The school did not run a newspaper at the time, and instead the scores were all published at once in the yearbook, which was called the Gitche Gumee, which is Ojibwa and Chippewa for Lake Superior. These games were often against high schools in the area, so we are not going to count them towards a total program overall record. The first 2 seasons in 1909 and 1910 were led by head coach A.C. Deneen, who guided the team to a 2-3-2 record. 1911 had a short stint from Dr. D.H. August taking his first crack at coaching the Yellow Jackets, and he would also come back from 1914 to 1917 with a final record of 9-14-4. George Keoghan coached 2 years in 1912 and 1913, and yet it's his 1913 squad that would still be talked about 100 years later. The first week of the 1913 season would end with a 6-6 tie to Whitewater. This would be Superior's lone tie that year, which would grant them their first conference title. This occurred because Whitewater would only have an additional tie and finish with a 2-0-2 record. The very next year in 1914, Superior went from first to worst. Yes, you're hearing that right. Going 0-3 and finishing last in the conference. In 1914, a fire destroyed the old main building and lots of records the school had. Students would study in various buildings around town, perhaps playing a hand in that one this season. From 1913 through the end of the 1929 season, Superior posted a 20-34-6 record with a winning percentage of 59. This included 3 straight winless seasons from 1914 to 1917, and multiple coaches came and went, including Louis Kolsinski with a 2-2-1 record in 1919, and the first entry into our all-time names of Superior in O.L. Foop, who posted a 5-4-1 record from 1920 to 1921. The 1918 season was canceled due to World War I and the flu outbreak, but the Gitche Gumee said there were games played. In that 1918 season, the team was led by Gerald Doonan, and the Jackets unofficially went a 1-2-2 on the season. Superior's next memorably named coach was or Earl Tubbs. Tubbs would get the team out of the dumps and winning games again, and boy did the Tubbsmen ever succeed in doing so. Tubbs posted a career record of 37-19-6, which included the conference title in 1928. Tubbs would coach through the end of that 1929 season and go on to coach at the University of Iowa and the University of Miami. Tubbs would finish just 3rd all-time in wins as a head coach in Superior's program history. Superior would just miss out on the 1929 title thanks to UW Milwaukee's 1 tie that year, and the Jackets finished 3-1, a half game back from Milwaukee. After the 1929 season had ended, Superior was suspended from conference play for the upcoming 1930 season for the use of an ineligible player. So an entire non-conference schedule was put together, and the team would go 3-2-2. This ineligible player suspension would foreshadow a major problem for Superior down the line, and something that considerably contributed to their abrupt end nearly 60 years later. Crossing into the 1930s, things were looking as bright as ever as they had for the football program. Despite the suspension, yet no one could have predicted that the school's next head coach would wind up being their best of all time. Ted Whereatt, a Superior native and alumni of the school, was hired to lead the team into the 1930 season. Whereatt put Superior back on the map, winning games in the North Division Conference title 3 straight times from 1935 to 1937. During the 1930s, Whereatt's squad posted a 49-20-9 record, winning 68% of the time. To have that success in the height of the Great Depression is remarkable. In 1931, Whereatt led the team to an undefeated record, but because Milwaukee had played one more game and had one more additional win, they were granted the conference title, even though both teams went undefeated. The school's paper, The Pessimist, would make a confusing claim that Superior had won the conference title in 1931. The article in which this was claimed was actually written 4 years later, in 1935, when the team captured the first of the 3 straight conference titles we mentioned earlier. That seems to be a discrepancy, as the WIAC's official records show that UW-Milwaukee had won the title in 1931. Superior would have won the conference that year if they had also scheduled 4 conference opponents in 1931. Those WIAC or WIAC diehards are hearing me say North and South Division. Yes, the conference used to be in divisions for about 14 years. From 1934 to 1947, the conference was split into North and South divisions. In the North, you had Superior, La Crosse, Stout, Eau Claire, and River Falls. The South had Stevens Point, Platteville, Oshkosh, Whitewater, and UW-Milwaukee. This split would greatly benefit Superior as it reduced travel times and distance. Travel back then was especially difficult, and even train service to Superior was little to none, with only 4 lines connecting the city. There was train travel early on in the area, but as the logging industry died down, so did the towns and stops along the railroads. There is reportedly a story that Whereatt's squad was unscored upon in both the 1936 and 1937 season, but there seems to be conflicting data once again. His own WIAC Hall of Fame induction video and college football results, who we'll mention as CFR going forward, all had conflicting data on these 2 seasons. So here's the lowdown. Both Hall of Fame pages say that the team was unscored upon for 2 straight years. FAR shows that's false in both 1936 and 1937. Upon deeper research, the November 20th, 1936 article of The Pessimist states that Superior was only unscored upon in conference play. The team went 6-2 that year, beating all of its conference teams. This should be clarified in the future, as that is a pretty big claim to make and a difficult feat to accomplish, going unscored upon, untied, and undefeated. Alas, other struggles and discrepancy when one researches football results from 90 years ago. Modern travel times from Superior to other UW schools are listed below. Now just imagine travel back in the 1900s before highways were invented in modern car technology. These are what it takes to get to these cities today. It was no doubtably longer back then. It's crazy to think how much time Superior commuted every year, and especially with the unpredictability of a Midwest winter or fall in Superior.
One additional discrepancy is Whereatt's Hall of Fame video. This extremely confusing induction video claims that he won conference titles in 1941 for both basketball and football. Initially, we thought the video was not correct, but upon listening to the video a few more times, the speaker is referring to Superior's basketball team. For some reason, when it comes to Superior's history, it just feels like everything is murky. The 1941 football title was a 4-way tie shared between Platteville, Whitewater, Stout, and La Crosse. As for football in 1941, there could have been a sole champion if Whitewater or Platteville didn't tie. The 2 teams played a 12-12 tie on a snowy and muddy field. The game was tied when Platteville took a 95-yard pick six in for a score before the game ended. A little fun fact about Whitewater Platteville is that these teams were known as the Whitewater Quakers and the Platteville Teachers. It's a good thing they changed their names. Another newsworthy tidbit is that during the 1941 and 1942 season, the New York Giants held camp at Superior to avoid the strain of summer heat and lack of air conditioning at the time. Conclusion to the 1942 season, Whereatt led Superior to a 3-2-1 record before World War II interrupted play from 1943 through the end of 1944. Leo DeMarco took over for Whereatt while he served in the Army for the 1945 season, who led Superior to an unofficial undefeated 2-0 season by defeating Stout and River Falls. In 1946, Whereatt would return for his final year as head coach of the Yellow Jackets and take Superior to another conference title with an absolutely unprecedented record of 1-0-3. Here's how that truly unique year unfolded. This is something we will never see again, thanks to the overtime rules that have been established. The chances of having 3 consecutive ties are ridiculously small. This would be the end of Northern Division titles for Superior, as they would never win a conference title, and the remainder of their time as a program and divisional play would end after the 1947 season. They would go on to make the WIAC championship game against Eau Claire in 1963, but ultimately lost. Whereatt stuck around his hometown until 1948, where he took position at the University of Indiana to coach freshman football and be an assistant to the dean. Superior records say that he was coached through the 1947 season, but CFR shows that Mark Dean was the new head coach for the 1947 season. The baseball field was named after Whereatt in his honor. Gone with Superior's existence is the long-lost rivalry with Minnesota Duluth for the Golden Goose Trophy. The two teams began playing each other, at least to the records we could find, in 1931. Now there are rivalries that combine intense dislike for each other, how close the schools are, or just combining the names of the two teams like the Cortica Jug. But the battle for the Golden Goose Trophy was anything but a rivalry, with Minnesota Duluth absolutely pulverizing Superior by a record of 37, 13, and 6. Gertie the Goose Trophy was first handed out in 1963 after Minnesota Duluth beat Superior. Duluth head coach James Malosky didn't even realize his team had the trophy until almost a year later, when he found it in his office while cleaning. Gertie spent more time in Minnesota than Wisconsin, as Superior's last win over Minnesota Duluth was in 1962, their last winning season in just 1 year before the trophy was made. Superior still had a rivalry with River Falls through the remainder of their existence. As Superior was entering its final golden years, the fruits of their continued success began to take off. They were able to attract top players such as Dom Mazzell, Doug Sutherland, and Gerald Schweiger. These were Superior's only draft picks, with 4 others making it into the league before the 1930s. Sutherland played for Superior native Bud Grant in Minnesota, and is someone we'll talk about in a minute. From 1947 to 1953, the team compiled a 21-19-5 record. This included a 6-1 season in 1947, in which their lone loss came to River Falls by a score of 21-13. Perhaps they could have gone back-to-back, but their 340 yards of penalties in 1947 says otherwise. Additionally, another notable Superior native and Superior graduate, Olaf Ole Haugsrud, would make his mark on the football world. Haugsrud bought the Duluth Eskimos back in the 1920s for $1. He was lucky enough to get the legendary Ernie Nevers on his squad, as they traversed over 17,000 miles in 20 consecutive road games. Eventually, Haugsrud sold the Eskimos back to the NFL, and the NFL promised him a chance to purchase a stake in a team should the league ever come back to Minnesota. After the Chicago Cardinals shortly contemplated the move to Minnesota by playing 2 home games in Minneapolis during the 1959 season, the NFL expanded to Minnesota, and the Vikings were born. Haugsrud turned $1 into a 10% stake of an NFL team. The school named their new football field after Haugsrud in 1954. It's also worth noting that the Vikings hired another Superior Wisconsin native in Bud Grant. Grant would end up as the winningest coach in franchise history, coaching the Vikings to 4 Super Bowl appearances. Returning to Superior's story, Mark Dean and Roy Melvin would put up some average years from 1947 to 1953, but they were just good enough to keep winning during this time. With the 1947 season being the last of the divisions, Superior had no idea the challenges that were about to face them. Now, let's take a little halftime break, if you will. I know it's probably been on your mind this entire time. Why have you shown us pictures of Superior in orange and black when their team is named the Yellow Jackets? In a 1930 article from Halloween, it says the team name was/were the Hornets. We're not sure when the modern Yellow Jackets started, but we've narrowed it down to sometime between 1992 and 94, as evidenced by these pictures. But the orange and black color scheme stayed for a long time, disappearing sometime between 1992 and 1994. Softball players can be seen with the script Jackets, which is massive on a softball helmet, in this picture. The tricolored bumblebee has an orange stripe on its stomach. So are they the Orange Jackets? The Jackets? The Hornets? The UW Superior Yellow-Orange Jackets? It turns out that in a 1993 article, Superior were originally named the Orangemen, but changed their mascot and name to the Yellow Jackets, but kept the difference in colors. Personally, the orange and black is a much more distinct color scheme. It would have definitely stood out today as one of the best in the conference, and also helped differentiate itself from Milwaukee and Oshkosh, who both use gold and black as their color scheme. When Superior hired Mertz Morelli, a former alumni and football player at Superior, it had to be seen as a slam dunk. Mortarelli's freshman season was played under Ted Whereatt in 1946, the year of their last conference championship. Superior looked to be competitive in the conference in 1954 and held a ton of positivity going into it. The result was a 3-6 season, and they did not win any games in conference play. Heck, they only scored 12 points in conference play, and all of those came against lacrosse. Superior suffered 4 shutouts. Superior didn't fare any better in 1955, garnering a ghastly 0-7-2 record, and once again were shut out 4 times. The 1955 season did see some offensive improvement, but it meant nothing at the end of the year. In 1956, the team finally saw some progress and finished with a 4-5 record and only got shut out once. This included their first ever win over UW Oshkosh, a 31-0 shutout that Superior was finally on the right side of. The Jackets were only losing one senior, Bernie LaValle, and had a much brighter outlook going into 1957.
After a few more years of middling play resulted with a total record of 16-22-7 from 1957 to 1962, Mortarelli broke through with his best 2 years as a coach in 1962 and 1963. In 1962, the team posted a 7-1-1 record, including beating Minnesota Duluth for the last time in the Golden Goose rivalry. Superior would tie Stout and lose to Stevens Point for the only blemishes on their record. Somehow, the title went to Whitewater, who had a 6-3 record. I was able to speak to John McFall, who was an all-conference defensive back from 1961 to 1964 for the Yellow Jackets. McFall would also go on to play 3 seasons for the AFL's Boston, now New England, Patriots. You'll hear snippets from the near 2-hour phone interview I conducted with him, and the full video will be uploaded at a later date. The 1963 season would also be a winning season, with Superior garnering a 5-4 record and losing to UW Eau Claire in a conference title game. There's a physical copy on projector film of this game at the University of Wisconsin's library in Madison and their archives room. But since we aren't nearby Madison and we don't have an old school camera that could properly run the film, we don't have access to that footage. 1963 would be Superior's last winning season in school history, as the slide started to happen for Superior. For the remainder of Mortarelli's tenure from 1964 through the end of the 1969 season, Superior had a hellish record of 9-46-1. This is where John McFall comes in and would tell us about how Mortarelli was actually fired 3 different times.
There's no secret to this. Mertz was fired 3 times as the football coach.
3 times?
Yeah, 3 times. He was basically said, Mertz, we're going to go another direction. We're going to bring in a new coach. We want you to just explain to people you're going to spend more time with your family. And so Mertz, being the loyal gentleman that he always was, would say, yep, I've decided it's time for me to spend more time with my family.
The Peptimist should have turned its title into the Pepto-Pist, as an November 12, 1969 article written after the team's loss to now Division II Ashland University of Ohio claims that the team was supposed to be, quote, be good this year, and furthermore, the Peptimist wrote, and for the past few years, Jacket boosters could be heard saying at this time of year, wait till next year. Well, next year never comes, if next year is where it's at. The turnover of good athletes, undergraduate athletes, destroys the rebuilding process. To win, one must have personnel. But this same old song can only come true if the disharmony is molded into a complementing sonata. End quote. What happened for Mortarelli to fall off the cliff so bad? One big potential factor is that he never gave himself a break or time to decompress. How can we say that? Well, Mortarelli was also a faculty member, something which was a requirement of coaches in those days. Mortarelli taught physical education, and he took the number of varsity sports from 3 to 11 at Superior during his time there. And he would go on to coach 8 different sports, and here's the entire list: football, tennis, gymnastics, wrestling, basketball, baseball, golf, track, and field. While Mortarelli's commitment was admirable, adding on teaching classes, expanding athletic departments, and all the other rigmarole that comes with Mortarelli's role would be nightmarish to handle. He never had a break, but for now, he did take a break from football and ultimately would return to coaching football later on down the road. Here's what John McFall had to say about Mertz being a little overworked. But I got one more question for you here, John.
Yes, sir.
Of course, like with Mertz being your coach, and then you coached alongside him, and he's credited for increasing the number of sports that were offered at Superior from like 3 to like 11, I believe. And he would end up like coaching all of those at some point in time, sometimes like concurrently or back to back. Do you ever think Mertz had too much on his plate so that he couldn't specifically focus on football?
Absolutely. And I don't say that as a criticism. Mertz says, well, I'll take football and wrestling, even though Mertz had never wrestled. Carl Vergamini was a wrestler from Iowa. He wrestled at the University of Iowa. He said, well, Carl, you take basketball. Dom, you take basketball and baseball. And the three of them were the coaches for all the sports. But on top of that, Mertz started the youth baseball program in Superior, created the youth baseball program for kids, the ballpark and everything. He's involved in all these other things, and yet he's the coach and the athletic director, doing all the recruiting. Go out and sit down with the parents and say, well, we're going to try to bring your son to Superior to play football or to wrestle. I'll be a second father. I'll help them get their degree, and I'll help them get a job after college. But we want your son to, well, the parents right away say, well, Tony, you're going to Wisconsin, or Ron, you're going to Wisconsin, or Joe Reese. But they were all great athletes.
Mm-hmm.
But Mertz would do that, and of course he's doing it during his off season, which there really wasn't one. As the football coach and the wrestling coach and the athletic director, I mean, he never had an off season.
In the 1970s, Ole Hogswood Field was getting surpassed greatly by his conference brethren. UW-Oshkosh, UW-Platteville, and UW-Whitewater were the first schools in the conference to build massive stadiums during the 1970s that still stand today. Oshkosh, Whitewater, and Platteville constructed behemoths that are still some of the biggest D3 capacity stadiums to this day. Oshkosh's J.J. Keller Field at Titan Stadium can hold 9,800. Platteville's Ralph E. Davis Pioneer Stadium can hold 10,000. And Whitewater's Perkins Stadium can hold 13,500. Whitewater has also been the site of record-breaking crowds for WIAC conference football games over and over again. These games are for records that are purely played on a college campus only, and not those of the St. John's playing at the Minnesota Vikings Stadium. Let's also not forget that Lacrosse's Veterans Field was purchased from the city in 1987, and in 2009 it was expanded. It currently also holds over 10,000 spectators and hosts the WIAA High School Outdoor Track and Field Championships every year. And going a little off script here, there is one thing I'd like to add. One of the things that really helps the WIAC schools are these big events that they host. Like for Oshkosh hosting the All-Star game for the football each summer. Whitewater hosts Band State at Perkins Stadium. And then of course with Lacrosse hosting the high school outdoor track and field championships. These events are really critical to bring in a lot of money, not only to the school, but to the area. And to my research, I could not find if Superior ever hosted such an event. Superior's stadium stayed the same for over 70 years until a renovation was announced in 2023. And this just shows the stark contrast between the athletic facilities at the time. There was also a story which hinted at just some of the issues that Ole Hogswood Field experienced. This story from WRST, Oshkosh's student radio station, provides the following. On November 5th, 1988, a WRST sportscaster travels to Superior to provide a play-by-play broadcast of the Oshkosh Superior football game, only to find that the phone line reserved for WRST is out of order. He's reduced to providing periodic live updates from a payphone at the stadium as the game was going on. Another thing that happened locally during that time was the state of Wisconsin basically reshuffled the high school districts and their maps. Long story short, Superior went from 3 high schools, East, Central, and Cathedral, and merged into one area high school. Milonic further elaborated on this during another episode of the Archive Dive podcast with the Superior Telegram and provided first-hand experience as she was a student who would graduate from the new school. Milonic was the only one in her family to not graduate from Superior East. Additionally, Milonic commented on how overcrowded it truly was. She estimates the school had about 200 more kids than it could truly handle, and the total number of students was close to 2,000. Milonic talked about how students would have to come in classes in shifts, with a morning set of students and an afternoon set. On top of this, students who lived nearby would often have to go to schools on Saturdays to make sure they got enough days of teaching. Could you imagine just being in good academic standing and having to give your Saturdays up as a teenager just to go to school, all because there's too many kids attending it? Milonic further elaborated that how strict the school was, specifically on the girls. She also mentioned that the school actually expelled 6 male students during her time there, as they refused to keep their hair at the length requirement the school had provided. These are just some of the factors playing into why UW Superior had very little influence and pull to the local kids as an option. When faced with the factors of other schools getting brand new stadiums and the strict upbringing that many had faced, all occurring in the age of rebellion known as the 1960s, had to have contributed to why many kids wanted to get the heck out of Dodge to avoid being reminded of their controlled upbringings. Additionally, a 1962 article from the Peptimist shows the strict policies when it came to education and campus life were not just limited to the high school level. The front page story talks about major changes to dorm regulations, and they are as follows. Unmarried men students under 21 will not be allowed to live in private apartments or house trailers next year. This regulation formerly applied only to women students, but will be extended to cover men students in the fall of 1963. 2. Students who live off campus by requiring the right to inspect student housing and to ask students to move if landlords are not providing proper surroundings, according to Mr. Arlovsky. Landlords are also required to report emergencies and all illnesses, which keeps students from attending classes. 3. That all freshmen and sophomores from outside Superior and its immediate surroundings are to live in residence halls insofar as space permits. Landlords are not to rent to freshmen or sophomores unless written approval is given by Mr. Olarsky or Miss Galentine. Here's where John McFall really has a very interesting viewpoint, because he was a proctor, or what is more called like an RA or CA community advisor for one of the dorms, and he tells us about all of the craziness that happened during his time there as a proctor for one of the dorms. 1962, that there was someone who set off like smoke bombs in Sunquist. Do you remember that at all?
Well, unfortunately, I don't lose any sleep over it anymore, but as a proctor in the dorm.
Oh, man.
One of the problems we had in Superior was that the Douglas County had a 21-year-old requirement for getting into the bars, even though Wisconsin itself, you could drink at 18.
That's right.
And a lot of the beer bars, of course, as you know, down at Oshkosh as well as La Crosse and the other state universities, they were all partying hard at 18 years of age. The beer bars were prospering and flourishing, including Northland College here in Ashland. But we had to go out of the county in order to get into a bar, an 18-year-old beer bar. And what would happen is a lot of the students coming back from the county, usually about a 25-mile drive, sometimes with a little bit too much to drink, and they'd get back to the men's dorm, and right away the fire hoses would come out. They'd start water fights. They'd pull the fire alarms.
Oh, my God.
Well, there was all kinds of stuff. Well, that wouldn't have been quite so much of a problem, but the dean of men and his wife, Phil Arlovsky, lived in the dormitory on the first floor right off the entry. And of course, as the college kids came home at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, all ginned up and all the festivities started, Phil would come running out of his room looking for who the culprits were. And I'd say, Phil, I'll take care of it. So I'd go up on the third floor, grab a couple of my friends, quite frankly, Tony and Herb and several others, and put them up against the wall and say, hey, you're going to get thrown out of school and you're going to get me thrown out of school. So we learned again that sometimes we had to enforce the rules even when we probably would have participated in the violations ourselves. But it was a good thing because it managed to keep us in school and give us a little bit more discipline than we probably would have normally had if we were all staying in some of the apartments that we lived in after our freshman, sophomore year in college. But it was all pretty much innocent fun. Unfortunately, nobody died. There were no serious crimes committed, but we did have some pretty challenging confrontations with both the dean of men as well as the chancellor as well as the students themselves. But it all worked out real well.
Now, all of this may have been normal back in the 1960s, but that would be unheard of today when it comes to determining who can live where based off their marital status, their hometown if you're not from the area, and for landlords to provide the school information on if one of their tenants was sick or not. It's not uncommon to see freshmen having to live on campus this first year, but to die on the hill of you're not from around here, so you must spend more money to stay in the dorms seems very odd. At the end of the 1971 season, Charles would accept the head coaching position at UW-Stevens Point, capping his tenure with a 10-10 record. As for what happened next for the program in his last 21 years, let's just say things got dark, and they got dark fast. The 70s and 80s were marked by constant coaching changes. Ed Bender replaced Charles. Bender was a highly successful coach from Illinois at 3 different high schools and had never had a losing season as a player or coach. Superior thought he could be the spark plug that the school had been looking for. Yet in the 3 years from 1972 to 1974 as head coach of the Yellow Jackets, Bender led the team to an abysmal record of 4-26. Depending on how you look at it, Whitewater had to forfeit 3 games in the 1971 season for the use of an ineligible player. Superior originally lost that game 38-9. If you'd like to give them a win right here, go ahead and feel free. The best Bender's team would fare was in 1973 with a 2-7 record, and for the first time in his life, Bender was on a losing team. The offensive struggles continued as Bender's squad would be shut out 7 times across his 3 seasons, and when Bender was let go, he wouldn't return to coaching football. Additionally, it's worth noting that the 1972 edition of the school's yearbook, the Gitche Gumee, would be its last and a loss of a very valuable reference and picture resource for this project. 1975 would see the return of Mortarelli, and up until his final season in 1983, there were more offensive struggles. The Jackets wouldn't win more than 2 games in any of these seasons and were outscored by a margin of over 1,900 points. The 5 season would thus live in infamy as Superior's offense would produce the lowest points scored in a single season during conference play. After scoring 1 touchdown in each of the first 2 games in 1975, Superior's offense went missing for weeks. 5 out of the next 6 games they were shut out, and the only exception to that was for a miraculous safety in the night game on the road against Platteville in Week 7, which resulted in a scoregami-like 20-2 loss. On the ensuing drive after the safety, Superior's offense would stall inside Platteville's red zone before turning the ball over on downs. The total on the year was 25 conference points and 42 overall for the season. The man who finally got points on the board for Superior? Tom Pitek. Imagine a defensive end having more point production than your offense for most of the season. Superior would finally score offensive points in the conference finale against Oshkosh, but ultimately lose, and the season finale would end up beating Ashland. Which, by the way, did you know that Arnold Schwarzenegger is a UW Superior alum? He earned a degree in 1979 through the distance learning program and would actually come back in the 1990s to give a commencement speech. So how's that for most famous alumni? I wonder if he's ever been asked about saving the football team. During the 1980 season, we would see the exacerbation of these offensive woes by Superior, specifically in the Week 9 home loss to Oshkosh. Superior would fumble an unprecedented 8 times, losing 3. They also threw 5 interceptions. So that's 8 accounted for turnovers and another 5 that probably should have happened. Let's take a moment to praise this group of tailgaters who hadn't missed a football game in 3 years, despite seeing some of the roughest football that you can probably even try to imagine. Now, maybe their antifreeze that they drank distracted them from the pain of losing, but when you have a fun time in college, especially with booze or any other sort of age imbibement, it may be the only thing that matters. Kudos to these kids. Two moments during the latter half of the 1983 season served as a microcosm of Mortarelli's tenure with the Jackets as their leader. Superior was crushed in a 36-7 road loss to Platteville in Week 9 of the 83 season, and this was without All-American defensive lineman Larry Banks and other members of the Sting. So who were the Sting? This was Superior's equivalent to the Fearsome Foursome or the Doomsday Defense. The Sting was comprised of these players. It was twin brothers Jim and Tom Vienne, Larry Banks, Chuck Janovic, and Russ Hagen. And this picture you see on your screen was actually a fundraiser for the athletic department and was the idea of Superior alums Kevin McKell and Robert Murphy, and you were able to purchase this poster for a whopping $3 back in the day at the school bookstore. Returning to the gridiron, all of a sudden during the game against Platt, cheerleaders were standing on the sidelines in their varsity sweaters with paper bags on their heads. One of the cheerleaders would write to the Promethean a week later and explain that it was in protest of how the cheerleaders' parents weren't honored on Parents' Day. But anyone can tell you that in the moment it was a clear sign of disgust and protest directed towards the football team. Let's address the elephant in the room, or the sidelines, if you will. No matter what happens in football, you have a brotherhood you suit up with game in and game out. You forge bonds and go through so many trials and tribulations together. I'm sure all of us have been on a team that hasn't done well, and yet you keep coming back for the thrill of a chance to win. And when you do, it's like you're on top of the world. To see this on your own sidelines in the middle of the game as a player must have been infuriating, confusing, and emasculating. The second example comes from Superior's conference finale in 1983, a 23-0 shutout loss against Stevens Point. In an interview with the Promethean, Mortarelli defeatedly drops this quote, "It's a crime with the kind of defense we have that we haven't won a lot of ball games. We've been close enough. If we just had any offense at all." If you play football, you know how this quote lands in the locker room. It's hard enough that the team struggles so much, but now your head coach is calling you out this late in the season after it's been over long ago. Superior would finish the season, and I'm running out of words to describe the anguish of these seasons, truthfully, with a record of 1-10. Mortarelli would retire from football for good after the season. The remainder of the 1980s wouldn't get any better as the team would only claim 8 wins in the entire decade. Gil Krieger ran the show from 1984 to 1987 and somehow won either 4 or 9 games total, depending on who you trust between the Duluth News-Tribune and CFR. This tenure included the absolutely horrific season in 1984. Here's where longtime equipment manager Ron Orstad comes in to shine more light on his experience during the 80s and the final years of Superior's football existence. Orstad was originally a ball boy for Superior from starting at age 10 and hung out at all the practices. Orstad would develop a relationship with Mortarelli, helping him at hockey and basketball games, and eventually becoming the equipment manager and being around Superior athletics from ages 10 to 24. In an interview I had with Orstad over Facebook Messenger, he had this to say about Gil Krieger. Mortarelli wanted Duluth's Vince Repish to get the job. Repish was a longtime assistant coach at Duluth and had earned the respect of Mortarelli. Mortarelli went ballistic when Chancellor Myers hired Krieger, and deservedly so. Mortarelli was UW Superior football despite his overall record. That man had given his entire life to university and would pass away from a heart attack just less than a year later in 1985. It's unfathomable that Mortarelli had to sit and watch Krieger destroy his team by having the worst season in school history. It got so bad after that in 1984, the Promethean published the season stat report after the Week 3 loss to Oshkosh. After that, virtually all writing of football in the paper vanished. It didn't help that there was a presidential election happening that year, but this was the beginning of the brutality from the Promethean. Where was the support? I guess from everybody else's standpoint, it's hard to support a team that has a point differential of negative 366. Krieger would endure a second winless season in 1986, which included one of the worst point differentials you'll see at minus 344, just slightly better than 1984 2 years prior. Yet in week 2 of the 1987 season, Superior would destroy Upper Iowa with a 52-0 shutout win in front of a packed Ole Hogsrud Field crowd. This was a relief, but it wouldn't last long, unfortunately. They lose the rest of the games until the season finale with the win over Oshkosh. As bad as things were, the athletes who kept showing up were some of the toughest you'd find. When you lose a lot of football games, you hang on to what really matters: the teammates and coaches beside you. This editorial piece from the Promethean lauds the two seniors that stuck it out for the entire 4 years. These athletes were as resilient as they come and most likely succeeded off the field in their endeavors. After that Oshkosh win in the season finale, Krieger's contract would not be renewed, with many of his players sticking up and wanting him to stay, despite the rough seasons they had leading up to this point. It was a disagreement in philosophy between Krieger and Chancellor Terrence J. McTaggart that would be the severing blow. Next up was Bill Connor. Connor was a native Wisconsinite and graduated from Mesmer High School in Milwaukee and went on to graduate from UW-La Crosse. Connor had a handful of coaching stops before landing at Superior, but taking over a team that had only 2 conference wins in his last 6 seasons is a tough task for anyone. There's a theme here, and I just want you to guess how Connor's tenure went in the 2 seasons as he was the head coach of the Yellow Jackets. 1-19. Oerstad continued to provide more information on Bill Connor with the following quote: "His coaching tenure was compared to the Exxon Valdez 1989 oil spill, if that says anything. He padded his career record with exhibition and scrimmage games. It's no wonder why Mortarelli was pissed with this hire." Just before winter break that year in 1988, Bill Connor held a press conference to set the record straight as sports writer Jim Muff of the Duluth News-Tribune wrote 2 different articles that basically attacked Connor. The first story cited discrepancies in Connor's coaching record before he took the Superior job. Muff told Connor the reason for the article was because the coach had once told a group of reporters at a press conference that he had a winning record before coming to Superior. Connor said, quote, "I never said that, Jim, and I will go to my deathbed saying I never said that." This also validates Ron Oersted's opinion or his experience because of the way that he compared his coaching career for Bill Connor. Connor also attacked some other writer at the News Tribune, which was not listed, defending his players from being called circus clowns. The second article that was written by Muff was all over a dispute he had with some of the officers of the Superior Touchdown Club. Because of the confrontation with the club members, some of the Yellow Jackets football team decided to forego their banquet. Connor replied by saying, "We don't need banquets, we don't need awards, we need field equipment, we need positive people, and we need weights." Towards the latter half of this article written here by Mike Birkeland in the Promethean, Connor starts to get himself into his own trouble. And whether he truly is defending or just putting on a facade is hard to read. The following is pretty damning. When elaborating further about the article with the Booster Club members, Connor said, quote, "The basic thing was people. I was threatened in that meeting. I had heard a lot of innuendo that night, and I sensed that most of the officers in the Booster Club were not going to be active. I asked them if they were going to quit, but I never called them quitters and losers. Never." The article continues. It says, quote, "During the dispute, Connor was asked if he regretted taking the job now that he has received so much negative publicity. Connor says, quote, "Yes, absolutely, without a doubt," he said, in front of his team. "I guess that's what I'm trying to get across. But then when I look out at these kids that play for me, and then I say no." Only win under Connor was a 27-14 win over Gustavus Adolphus. The losing would ultimately return. This is where the student journalists and the general student body began to truly voice their displeasure with the lack of success the football team was having. When you see the pictures and the faces and the optimism that Patrick Burks and Kevin John have in this clipping, it really makes you feel for those kids. At the end of the 1989 season, Connor unleashed what could be called a rant to the Promethean. Connor said that he felt like, quote, "a whipping boy," end quote, and claimed that Minnesota Duluth was too close and thus taking all of Superior's recruits. Connor talked about how he was trying to make football an educational experience, which is something that Superior just struggled with. I could commend his nature, but that clearly wasn't working. Published the very next week, the Promethean included a student op-ed piece titled, "UWS Students, Are They Making the Grade?" And sadly, they weren't. 241 students were academically suspended, and only 73 were allowed to re-enter. College can be a very tough adjustment for many, and maybe Superior lacked those resources to help. And by the looks of this final picture, I don't know if Connor understood what trouble the program was in, as evidenced by his aloof and blissfully unaware smile in the final photo. The door at head coach kept turning. Ted Thompson came in 1990 and helped Superior win its first conference game since 1987 in a 23-19 win over Eau Claire. Looking at these homecoming photos, Superior won a mud bowl game against Eau Claire. I mean, just imagine what that must have done for the morale of the team. We do see a picture of how sparsely attended the game was despite the weather. As for the 1990 season win total, they could have had 2 more victories if kicker Leon Clore didn't miss 2 field goals in a 3-0 loss to Oshkosh in week 2. Thompson seemed to have the offense clicking against Whitewater that year as they outgained Whitewater in a handful of categories. The only problem? The offense couldn't score when it mattered, but it was progress, something that's so invaluable to a young team that has to start from scratch every single year. And just when things looked like they were going well, a rift developed between assistant coach Larry Banks and Thompson. Thompson forced Banks to resign, saying that Banks was getting, quote, too close to the players. Meanwhile, Banks just wanted to help them with financial aid, jobs, and housing. It's understandable to see why Thompson may have thought this was a threat or a recruiting violation, but in reality it was one of the worst things he could have done. Banks, to our research capabilities, was the last UW Superior player to get any sort of tryout or action in the NFL. He had a tryout with the Denver Broncos and had been a UW Superior lifer. It made no sense. But Banks resigned and stayed on as the school's wrestling and strength coach. Once again, Superior's football team dealt with microcosms seemingly every year. Just below Banks' resignation article on the front page of the Promethean was about how a student threw a firecracker that was as strong as 1/8 of a stick of dynamite and blew up the toilet in one of the dorms. This is also 30 years after someone set off 3 military-grade smoke bombs that shook Sunquist Hall one November evening. Other listed vandalism was forks being broken off in janitor closet doors, loaves of bread left out to spoil in the shower, and many more males in the dorms protesting that their showers weren't being cleaned enough, which was twice weekly. And they said at the end of the 6th day, they were, quote, walking through slime to get to the showers. Legitimate complaints? Yes. Right action? Probably not. College activities, if you've ever heard of them? Definitely. But if you thought we were done with Thompson and his rocky season, you're wrong. The same reporter who wrote the Banks resignation piece, Rachel Grittner, would openly call out the departing Thompson for his sexist behavior and apathetic and lethargic approach to reporters in general. This is just another twist of the knife in the culture that Superior had going on within its football program. The 1991 season brought, once again, new hope as the final new coach of UW Superior would be hired in Dan Lounsbury. Lounsbury was a journeyman assistant coach and had previous head coaching experience, and also played quarterback in Arkansas. Lounsbury would get the team off to a 1-1 start before clinching Superior's biggest win since the 1946 conference championship. We'll let the video run on this one.
Coach Dan Lounsbury had a chance to experience his first game as head coach of the Yellow Jackets today, and what a game it was as the Jackets hosted UW Whitewater at Hogsrud Field, and even the normally sedate Jim Brown excited about this one. The Jackets trailing the Warhawks by a touchdown with 5:48 to go in the game when Billy Ferramo hits Rob Cozy with a 10-yard scoring toss, cutting Whitewater's lead to 14-13. But Leon Clore missed the extra point and a chance to tie it. However, with 5 seconds to go and a chance to redeem himself, he makes the most of it, kicking a game-winning 33-yard field goal to give the Jackets a 16-14 victory, their first over Whitewater since 1961.
And the only thing that was going through my mind was the ball and the uprights, and that's all I saw.
You zoned the rest of it out?
No, I was kind of hoping they had another timeout. Just kind of milk it a little. No, I'm just kidding.
What a moment for these Yellow Jackets. 30 years of being beat down by Whitewater. Who could forget the power outage game, the tie game in 1985? When Leon Clore kicked that ball right through the uprights after missing the extra point just minutes before, it was 30 years of frustration, anger, and a whole lot of other emotions come pouring out of the team and its downtrodden fan base. This win brought a spark back to campus that hadn't been seen in decades, if not almost a half century. Could you imagine the parties that took place in Superior that night? This would lead to a jam-packed Ole Hogsrud Field the very next week to take on the early 90s dynasty of UW lacrosse. They had won the 1985 D2 title and would take D3's crown in 1992 and 1995. With UW Superior at 2-1 for the first time since 1985, Superior was the place to be in a highly anticipated showdown between David versus Goliath. Goliath wouldn't even have to blink as lacrosse blew out Superior 58-7. But here's one real important thing I'd like to focus on. In the October 4th, 1991 issue of the Promethean, there were signs of real culture being built. Here you have a local kid in Tom Bellinger, a Superior High School grad, who chose Superior over North Dakota State and the Wisconsin Badgers because he thought he could make a difference here. Bellinger was the spark plug of the team and often their only source of offense in their final years. Bellinger would also organize for the team to be out in the neighborhood on Halloween weekend to make sure the kids were safe. Now, this is what team building and community visibility is all about. Superior finally had a culture coming back, and this is really bittersweet to see in retrospect as we know what happens in the end. Over the course of the next 4 weeks to get to Halloween, the Yellow Jackets would go 0-3-1 with that tie coming against Eau Claire. This brought us to Halloween weekend 1991. Bellinger and his crew thought they were going to be helping the kids in the neighborhood trick-or-treat, but Mother Nature had other plans. It's Thursday, October 31st, 1991. The day started out like any other autumnal day in Wisconsin. Some freezing rain fell, which then eventually turned into a mix, and then finally snow. It would start snowing on Halloween and not stop for 2 days. That's correct, 2 straight days. Here's a formal excerpt from the National Weather Service in Duluth website. During the height of trick-or-treating, the storm began as rain, changed quickly to freezing rain, and before the evening was over, it was snowing. It continued to snow for 2 more days, with final totals of 36.9 inches at the Duluth airport and 45 inches in Superior. It snowed consecutively from October 31st to November 1st. It postponed Superior's trip to Oshkosh, and Superior would have to play Oshkosh on Election Tuesday and lose 32-12 and finish the season 2-6-1. Getting in touch with alumni for this project has been extremely hard, and I was lucky enough to get in contact with Paul Lundgren, who was a sophomore on Superior's football team in 1992 when it was cut. Paul agreed to do a phone interview with me, and I was able to get 45 minutes of his time, and he had a lot to talk about this snow game, his overall experience, the traditions he brought back, and the overall downfall of the program. You'll hear snippets from that interview for the rest of the video, and the full interview will be uploaded at a later date.
So yeah, the Halloween megastorm of 1991. It started on a Friday, and I can't recall, we must not have practiced because it was already snowing on Friday night. We may have had like a chalk talk or something, or the game may have already been canceled. I don't remember, but I remember driving home from UWS and, maybe a half a foot of snow had already accumulated, and then it just snowed all day the next day and into the next day. I mean, mountains of snow.
Oh my God.
And that game got rescheduled for, I'm pretty sure, a Tuesday, which would have been Election Day. And
wow.
I'm, 19 years old at that time. So this is the first time I'm voting for Duluth mayor, and I didn't get to vote because obviously I didn't vote in advance, and I couldn't because we were on the road to Oshkosh that day. That was the rescheduled date. But the memories I have of that are, there was a door in Gates Gymnasium that led out to the practice field, which wasn't really a practice field. It was just a big grassy area. Mm-hmm. And so on the Monday before this Tuesday game, we had a practice in the gymnasium, shoulder pads and helmets, just basically a walkthrough before the Tuesday game. And guys were sitting in the hallway I don't know why we had to wait to go in the gymnasium, but they were all sitting around in the hallway, and I came out and I walked over to the door to the practice field where we normally go, just to sort of walk through the door as a joke, like, I'm going to go outside and practice in 6 feet of snow. And I opened the door, and it was just completely, like, the whole opening to the door was completely filled with snow. Oh. There was like a giant drift against the door.
Wow. Man. I would have paid to see that. Lounsbury had doubled the wins from the previous 2 coaches combined and had shown that they were beginning to lay the foundation to succeed going into 1992, but maybe that winter storm was trying to tell them something. We're here. We've made it to the 83rd and final year of UW Superior football. Lounsbury had gotten what seemed to be the quarterback replacement they had been looking for since Bob DeMeyer graduated in 1990. In comes Jason Woods, a transfer from the University of Utah. This is a Lounsbury-type solution, and it worked. So why not become another landing spot for another notable D1 transfer? Enter Texas running back Butch Hadnot.
Happenings at UWS. Butch Hadnot, the leading rusher at the University of Texas the past 2 years, is seeking a transfer due to alleged scholastic violations. His first choice for a new school, UWS.
We're not saying that he's genuinely here yet. What we're saying is there's some things that have to take place, and he's definitely called us and he's told us some things, and so now we're in the progress of getting the paperwork done, and you know, it may or may not come out the way we'd like it to come out.
University of Texas running back Butch Hadnot had not arrived in town, but it looks good. It looks like he's going to come here instead of UW Superior.
Did you guys ever end up getting that running back from Texas or some of these high-profile D1 transfers?
No, I mean, yeah, that was a pretty silly little pursuit there. Like, there was no way he was going to academically qualify to play at UWS. So I don't know why there was, you know, such an effort to bring him in. Other than that, you know, obviously there was some pressure to win and win fast, and you know that kind of led to the demise of the program. But yeah, you know, it would have been a thing to bring him in. But then again, you know, I don't think I heard his name again after that, so I don't know what became of him if he finished a college career anywhere.
Hadnot had attempted to transfer from UT Austin to UW Superior as he was academically ineligible at Texas. Hadnot played 2 years at Texas and had the following stat line: over 200 carries for over 1,000 yards, 11 rushing touchdowns, and a few catches through the air. By Superior standards, that's enough to salivate over. When Lounsbury was preparing for the season, he said, "We wrote 90 kids in for the summer, and every one of them said that they would be here in the fall. I know there is usually a 20 to 25 kid fallout rate, and I thought we'd have about 65 to 70 players to report. In reality, only 45 players showed up for camp, and according to Paul Lundgren, who was entering his sophomore season at the time, a lot of these verbally committed players were community college kids. These ex-community schoolers may not have been serious about playing, had financial issues come up, or weren't admitted in due to grades or transcript issues. The day before their first game of the 1992 season, and what would ultimately be their final win as a program, a 27-22 win over Concordia St. Paul, 9 players were deemed academically ineligible, which brought their total down to 36. The following road game against Augsburg was played on turf, according to Lundgren, and all but 1 or 2 players had ever played on turf for Superior. 8 Yellow Jackets went down with injuries, including Lundgren, and this left them with 28 players.
And yeah, that last team in '92, you know, by the time the injuries and had cut down the roster, there were only about 22 of us.
Oh wow!
It was, you know, that was, you know, any number of things may have went wrong with UW Superior football over the years, but what the true failure was the recruiting for the 1992 season, because most of the players who were recruited were community college players from the region who didn't show up at training camp.
What?
And some of them who did weren't academically eligible to play. And so the roster was already small to start with. And there are plenty of high schools in the region, including Superior Senior, which had a very successful high school program that, you know, I don't think we had a single new UW Superior or new Superior Spartan player that season. Not one that I can remember. We had some on the team from previous years, but I don't think we had any new ones that year. So, you know, they were trying to win quick, and so they were looking at who are the top community college players in the region. Let's bring them in, and just a lot of them didn't show up. And so the roster was thin, and then we played our second. We had 2 preseason games, and the second one was on turf, and none of us had ever played on turf before. maybe somebody had played, but like I had never played on turf, and I think most of those guys never played on turf. And so I was among the injured, although I just like had a very mild ankle sprain that I could have played through. But we were just in a position where 8 or 9 guys got hurt, and that really cut the roster down.
8 Yellow Jackets went down with injuries, including Lundgren, and this left them with 28 players, and it put Pat Dolan, the athletic director, and Chancellor Betty Youngblood in a tight spot. Somewhere during all of this in the 1992 season, Youngblood and Dolan must have had some clandestine meetings about the future of the program. Meanwhile, the football team was getting ready to open conference play against UW Stout. They woke up on Monday, September 14, 1992, expecting to get ready for practice and install for the week. Instead, they were called into a meeting in the locker room. It was there that Lounsbury informed them in a curt, brutal, and debatedly cruel fashion, 20-minute closed-door meeting, that their entire football program and careers were over. Players were slamming lockers and crying, amongst probably a ton of choice words. They only had an hour before Dolan made the news announcement to the media that the Hive would be destroyed.
Could say the UWS football coach dropped a bomb on his players tonight. And it wasn't entirely his decision. He made it along with the administration. With all of the mounting problems over there, we should have seen this coming.
Tough news.
Oh, no doubt about it, Stacy. The UWS football team has suffered many losses in recent years, but you could put all of them together and they still wouldn't hurt as much as the loss the Yellow Jackets players suffered today. It was the loss of their football program, at least for this season and possibly forever. Today, the university announced its decision to suspend football operations for the remainder of the 92 season due to a dwindling roster. Injury and ineligibility had reduced it to 28 players, with 6 of those questionable for this weekend's home game with UW Stout. UWS Athletic Director Pat Dolan called it an unsafe situation.
First and foremost is the safety and concern of the student athletes, and for someone to lose contact sport eligibility for the rest of his life because he's injured or maimed, or we've discussed this and I decide that we're going to play, or Coach Lounsbury says we're going to play and somebody does get hurt, that's a much worse decision.
It kind of leaves a knot in your stomach, and you don't feel very good about it. And when your kids are crying and they're highly emotionalized, and you don't have any good answers for them, other than they don't see that it's for their benefit. They see we'll go to the last man. If we've only got one guy, we'll play.
Those who play football know that the hardest moment is when it's over for good. The game these men have cherished, sacrificed their bodies, money, and mental health was all gone in an instant. For Dolan to have the press conference an hour later seems like something out of the Jim Boylan Chicago Bulls era. The emotional toll that this must have taken on these players is unmistakable. Of course, Dolan would say it's for the athlete's safety, to prevent more from getting injured or maimed, meaning permanently damaged, but Dolan cut the program when she did, in her words, so that, quote, the players have a chance to retain their year of eligibility should they remain in school, either at Superior or by transferring elsewhere. Why weren't they allowed to finish the season? 28 for a college football team is indeed small, but if there's anything these men did was return despite the odds being low. Shouldn't that be what the college football experience is all about? Overcoming obstacles of all kinds and persevering through the darkest of times to eventually come out on top? Superior would forfeit the rest of the games on their schedule. Their upcoming opponent that week, UW Stout, had 2 weeks now off between non-conference and WIAC play as a result. UW Stout's head coach at the time, Rich Lawrence, was, quote, very unhappy about the decision and ultimately said, quote, I think it was the right thing to do, but I don't like it. As for the reaction to cutting of the program, we can see that it was wide-ranging. Here is Larry Banks once again claiming that Chancellor Youngblood had it all premeditated. Also, Daryl Kaufman, a Superior biology professor, said that everyone was thinking of the football program first and was pro-football. But when you see all the facts put in front of you, it was the only decision a logical thinking chancellor could make. In the September 18th, 1992 article of the Promethean, UW Superior Touchdown Club founder Tony Milosky would be quoted saying, I don't believe this. 2 months ago, somebody told me they were going to drop football, and I didn't believe them. 66 years of my life I've dedicated to this program are gone. It's down the drain. Just like that. Is there real suspicion to say that Youngblood had been premeditating this? And more reactions to the cut of the football program come streaming in, with Paul Lundgren saying, shocking but not surprising. When they decided to shut it down, of course, a lot of the players were upset, but what was like the local reaction to that?
I think the program hadn't been doing well for a while, so a lot of people weren't particularly surprised, other than that it shut down so abruptly. In other words, there wasn't an ongoing conversation about whether UW Superior should have a football program. It was, the storyline at that time had kind of been that the program was working on rebounding, that there was a new head coach there, and kind of looking at all of the bright spots of kind of rebuilding this program. And then, so when it died, it was a shock, but not a surprise, maybe.
Okay.
And I don't know, it's also a shock in the sense that it was such a storied program. It had a long history, and so, anytime something like that goes away, it hurts.
Then there was Jay Faraday, a writer for the Promethean, writing some of the most brutal comparisons and alliterations to describe the UW Superior football program and how he saw it. He had a column titled Whatever I Want, and boy, did he ever get whatever he wanted in these articles. Junior running back and Superior High School graduate Tom Bellinger, who we talked about earlier, was a first-team all-conference running back, and he said that the team would continue to practice and play club teams in the area, even if they were to get their butts beat 100-0. Bellinger said the 25 guys out there would do anything to keep playing. Bellinger also added, and this is assuming he's talking about the athletic office with Chancellor Youngblood and AD Pat Dolan, he added this: no one ever helped us. Every time they told us one thing, and the next thing you know, they're telling us something else. No one over there ever tried to help. There was also a student senate meeting about a month after the initial suspension of the program, in which a 5-3 vote in favor of Dolan cutting the program was upheld. But what were the facts that Kaufman said earlier? Perhaps this is what he meant. And let me brace the audience here by saying that these stats are what they are, and they are dark, but it shows what Chancellor Youngblood may have had to really consider here when cutting the program. 1963, that was the last year Superior had a positive point differential, and since 1930, UW Superior got outscored as a program 6,478 to 11,253 with a almost negative 5,000 point differential. Superior was shut out 109 times, an average of 1.3 per year. In 1970 and 1971, this was the last time Superior wouldn't have a losing season by technical definition. They both went 5-5 in these seasons, and they would not have no more than 2 wins in a season after 1971. In 1970, Monty Charles took over for Mortarelli after his first stint, and out of all the players who said they'd come back for the next season, only 18 of them actually showed up at fall camp. In 1974, there was just a horrid offensive production day against Platteville, as you can see here. 1975, Superior suffered 4 straight shutouts. Additionally, they had an assistant coach get 2 prison sentences for drug-related charges. In addition, Superior lost that game to Whitewater that year after a power outage postponed the game at halftime and ultimately called in Whitewater's favor, a 17-0 win for Whitewater. In 1977, Superior had a chance to beat Platteville, but 2 block punts and a failed fourth quarter rally did them in. In 1979, there was this confusingly worded bit about getting just absolutely smoked by Whitewater that day, and helps illustrate more of the offensive struggles that persisted with Superior. In 1982, they stopped a 32-game conference losing streak with a 23-16 win over Oshkosh, and in 1983, Mortarelli's last season, Unfortunately, he would wind up with the dubious record of the 11th most losses by a head coach in college football history, regardless of division, with 176 career losses. 1984 would see the team let up a minus 366 point differential, get shut out 4 times. The highest point total in a single game that year was in a 17-16 loss to Oshkosh in week 3. And they were outscored a combined 94-0 in the first 2 games. In 1985, Mertz Mortarelli would suffer a heart attack and pass away. In 1986, they would also let up a historic minus 344 point differential, get shut out 3 more times, and the highest points scored that year was 16 against Oshkosh in week 10. There's something about scoring 16 points against Oshkosh. In 1987, Gil Krieger was fired. 1991, with this interview I did via phone with Paul Lundgren, he talks about the recruiting strategy and what really led to the demise of the program from his eyes.
Any number of things may have went wrong with UW Superior football over the years, but what the true failure was the recruiting for the 1992 season.
Other records include UW Superior getting shut out by La Crosse 89-0, which is still a conference record today. They allowed a WIAC record 642 yards rushing against River Falls in 1989. They own the WIAC record for fewest points scored in a single season with 26 in 1975. They own the WIAC record for most interceptions thrown in a single season with 37 in 1982. And in their entire time as a program, they had only 75 wins against conference teams in their entire history, with most of those being before the 1960s. Superior had 7 winless seasons and only had 33 All-American selections, with 31 of them from 1969 or earlier. The last 2 were Larry Banks and Phil Eitling in 1985. But before we get to that, we interrupt your timeline with another timeline coming in. There's no perfect spot for this interruption, so buckle up. Back to Superior we go. We need to talk about Orstad's experience, a place called Hibbing Community College, and the war that would end up being Lounsbury versus Superior administration. As a disclaimer, this is his own personal account of what happened and is not 100% true. Make of what you will from the following quotes. Orsted said that there was a feud between Lounsbury and administration. Lounsbury let Hibbing Community College use Superior facilities before a 1991 bowl game in Iowa without approval. Quote, I was part of the Hibbing staff at the time before being a member of Lounsbury's final staff. I had recruited many Hibbing players to come to Superior, but they had to attend summer school to be eligible to play, so they completed the credits they needed and were eligible to play, or so we thought. But the night before our first game, we were notified that they had missed some credits on their transcripts, so they were ineligible for the season, end quote. Here's what happened. Hibbing, or we, were scheduled to play in Iowa, but we were nailed with a huge snowstorm in 1991, which was the Halloween blizzard, so we didn't have anywhere to practice. I got a hold of Larry Banks, and he and Lounsbury arranged it. And after our bowl game, a huge fight broke out, and the Hibbing's coach disappeared, leaving all of us at the dorms to clean up after a huge race riot took place and trashed our dorms. I immediately called both Banks and Lounsbury drove a university vehicle up to Hibbing to assist our players because the Hibbing coach went AWOL. The overlooking of player transcripts not admitting Butch Hadnot, they, as in Pat Dolan and Chancellor Betty Youngblood, wanted to have soccer instead and destroy Mertz's legacy of building I forgot how many programs down to like 10 or 8. After Mertz passed away and once Dolan took over the wrestling program, which was a powerhouse under Mertz and their highest revenue sports besides hockey, were cut. In addition, he adds these 2 quotes to what was said earlier. Some of the Iron Rage citizens didn't like players hitting on their women, so they vandalized the dorms and put racial slurs all over the walls. Additionally, Orsted quotes, I think the Hibbing incident had something to do with it, the program getting cut. Like Banks said, I think it was premeditated. Lounsbury did let us use the gym to practice and put us up in the dorms for free without authorization from administration. So why am I bringing this up? Why am I introducing another timeline after spending so much time on the stuff that we know and know is true? Well, listen to this final part from Orsted about the Hibbing incident, and it may open your eyes and explain why. He says, quote, I was later told that the director of admissions and Lounsbury got into a huge disagreement over the Hibbing incident, and that said director told Lounsbury that he would, quote, get even. Now, that is a lot to unpack here, and it could explain why Lounsbury had such a change in the amount of players from the spring into the fall of 1992. Whereatt continues, Butch Hadnot had chose Superior over Duluth, but as he was about to go to the airport and come to Superior, he was declared ineligible by Pat Dolan and Youngblood. Quote, "In my opinion, if the administration wasn't mad at Lounsbury for the Hibbing incident and buried the players' transcripts and the depth of the team, we would have been very competitive. It was later discovered that when Dolan was interim AD, she wanted to eliminate programs in order to compete with St. Scholastica. We did raise enough money to save the program, and Duluth's head coach, Jim Milosky, was even campaigning for us." This makes Tony Milosky's comment about how he was told 2 months in advance that the program would get cut seem that much more interesting. Finally, Whereatt said there was a legend of a wind event that started at Ole Hogswood Field and went to Old Main, where the Chancellor's office was, and some say it was the spirit of Coach Mortarelli showing his disappointment in the dropping of the football program and wrestling program 1 year to the day that the football program was cut. Basically, a downburst of wind damaged the Chancellor's office 1 year to the day of the football program being cut. I have not found any official record saying this is true. Maybe a win over Augsburg would have shown real progress for the school, as Superior hadn't started 2-0 since 1962, and it would have been a real high water mark for the team under Lounsbury. However, knowing that injuries and academic ineligibility were so prevalent, it could have been a systemic issue at Superior. Perhaps up until this point in time, the university lacked the proper personnel to help show or teach positive study habits to student athletes. Turnover in coaches resulted in a lack of discipline from football's authority figures, and desperate coaches turned to players who may be weaker academically just to fill holes on the roster. While societal stereotypes often simplify the challenges faced by student athletes, the personal circumstances and academic struggles of these players remain complex and unknowable to us today. The school even held a convocation assembly about study habits in 1990. At least they were trying, right? Another major sign of academic trouble was in 1962, when a November 30th article of the Peptimist showed that 150 students received warning slips, which meant they had more than one D or E for grades. What the hell is an E for a grade? Losing doesn't help any team regardless of sport, but the harsh vitriol and apathy the general student body had towards the team for the 1972 season and onward was just astonishing. If there's anything one can learn from this, especially for those who are younger, it's how different the world was back then. Especially via newspaper, which was one of the top 3 ways to get your news other than the radio or TV. The student writers never held back, and the opinions were never born from the general student body too. One could deduce that because of the coach turnover, team image and public visibility was 0 to none. Briefly touched upon earlier, but when the WIAC got rid of divisions in 1947, that was a challenge that Superior could not ignore. Longer travel times and bigger mental strain on athletes to keep up in their studies was introduced and never really dealt with. How much work could you get done after 3 hours in pads, then a near 6-hour bus ride home to Superior from Whitewater? It would be incredibly difficult. One area of potential downturn in students choosing Superior, other than those underestimating the weather and its location, was that what were reported as campus crimes. Doors being left open, lights being left on, windows open. I mean, just look at this list. There is no way that pre-mainstream internet that this is what was being focused on by the UWS Police Department. This is just what Superior did back in the day, I guess. Finally, Superior did not ever stand up for itself when it came to protecting its number one source of income, Ole Hogswood Field. I'm talking about the quality of the field itself. There would be 4 games per week, with high school games being played on the field. And a 1991 Promethean article states that just days before the win against Whitewater, an entire foot of mud was covering most of the field. 1 foot. If Superior would have just said to the high schools, sorry, you need to find someplace else, or coordinated the schedule better, this could have been avoided. But a bad field with mud that high is a big chance for injuries, and perhaps this is their missed sign that a turf field would have saved them. We leave you with a team that needed a true leader on campus, and the only one that unmistakably did that was Ted Whereatt. Yet even Superior's golden child left town. And for what reason did he truly move on from Superior that wasn't just job related? Superior was caught in the nostalgia wave from 1947 to 1954. They were still winning football games, the university was expanding and adding majors, and they had just hired Mortarelli as the team's head football coach. Was it the fact that Mortarelli employed a style of coaching that was similar to Whereatt, but it resulted in the classic clash of cultures between young and old? Was it the fact that Mortarelli also taught classes and could have had unrealistic standards for his players? There were little investments in student academic progress and athletic facilities. Hogs Root Field wasn't upgraded until 2024, in which turf was finally laid and a track was placed around the soccer field. It would be much longer time until the academic buildings were updated. Let's not forget that Superior has accomplished quite a bit during this time as a university. They were the first accredited college in the state. They were the first to teach those who wanted to teach kindergarten. They have the second largest international student population behind UW-Madison in the state. They are a huge player in naval navigation and shipping on the Great Lakes. It was also a key base of training in World War II. Jim Dan Hill was a commander in the Army. The school's library is named after him. Finally, it is still an open university that gives kids in the northern part of the state an option that is nearby. The northern colleges are slowly disappearing across that part of the state in Wisconsin. Another thing worth noting is that Mortarelli, Charles, and Bender all coached during probably the most difficult time ever to coach in the WIAC. Coaches such as Forrest Perkins of Whitewater and Russ Young of Oshkosh and others made the WIAC a 17-round prize fight to win. And when you did, that meant you were among the best in the country. While Mortarelli brought many new sports to the campus, his decision to keep coaching different sports year-round had to wear him down. When it came to money, Dolan said the $107,000 for the program wasn't sustainable. In today's money, that would be about $246,000. When you don't win or at least invest in your university's facilities or the academics, your school suffers fast. Look at the college football culture in America nowadays. Each year, it's a race to see who can have the shiniest and brightest things on campus. Who can blame them? When your football team succeeds, your university succeeds. And not having a men's dorm until the 1950s is a surefire way to not have many dads who tell their children about how much they loved or hated their college experience. Superior's location isn't easy to get to unless you fly into Duluth and come over the bridge. Superior is a blue-collar town. The area between the two cities is known as the Two Ports and is a crucial part of maritime trade on the Great Lakes. It can be very physical and tough upbringing for kids, especially if both their parents sacrifice greatly just to make ends meet or work very physical and laborious jobs. They desire social mobility and perhaps want a better life than what their parents had, given the city and the environment they grew up in. In order to succeed at a small school in athletics, you must succeed early and often or face the torrent of the tight-knit community as they grow apart from your squad. Sports can do so much for small towns and small schools. Our final thoughts on the memory and legacy of the UW Superior Yellow Jackets football team come down to the following. It is a somber ending for a program that once had prominence. Imagine what memories we could learn of if we could contact those who have since passed. Those who are still with us live with the burn scar on their hearts and are scattered around the country, or we just don't have an easy form of contact for them. It just comes down to vetting the right coach, and when that can't be done properly, the players won't succeed. At the end of our 83-year journey, and at the end of each respective day, those who came back year after year were the true champions. They can look into the tallest adversaries and take them to the limit. If they fell down, got back up, and kept fighting. That's what the human spirit is all about. When you are a champion of life, you're an immortal as a player. And as for the coaches, well, coaches never lose.
A beautiful plaque on the granite monument contained a poem that Mertz always carried with him entitled Coaches Never Lose. And all came away from Mertz Mortarelli. Anyone who knew him was better because of it. Corner of Belknap and Mortarelli Drive, the mayor presented Mrs. Betty Mortarelli with the official proclamation.
This is such a beautiful day, and it's a day that I will never forget. When I first heard that they were going to honor Mertz by having this granite and the bronze plaque with Mertz's picture, and the coach's the card that he carried. It was and it's inscribed on this plaque. It's he carried it in his wallet for many, many years, 30-some years, maybe even longer. And when they told me that they're going to name Boundary Road after Mertz, and I said, oh, how great, because that's a path that he took for 32 years.
Mayor Bergson also presented his Citizen of the Month award to John Orsted, the young individual who worked under Mertz and honored his former boss by spearheading this dedication drive, raising money for the plaque and the monument and getting the council and mayor to rename the street. Orsted, Debbie Craig, and others really put their shoulders to the wheel in this endeavor. John McFall was the MC at the platform, which also included Father Mullemans of Superior Cathedral, Stan May, sports editor, Evening Telegram, Bruce Bennett of the Herald News Tribune, yours truly, Jack Shepard of the Recreation Board, Dennis Murphy of UWS, former colleague on the UWS coaching staff, Carl Vergamini, and one of Mertz's former prize pupils, one-time pro football star Doug Sutherland. Another pro great, Green Bay's legendary linebacker Ray Nitschke was on hand too.
Well, I'm really pleased and honored to be here. I got to know Mertz, and I really admired him and appreciated him, so I think he had a lot to do with helping a lot of young people through the Superior State and around the country.
The beautiful plaque on the granite monument contained a poem that Mertz always carried with him entitled Coaches Never Lose. And all came away from Mertz Mortarelli. Anyone who knew him was better because of it.